Hi everybody, welcome back. In the last video, we talked a little bit more about corrective taxes as one policy option to address negative externalities. In this video, we're going to continue looking at policies to address negative externalities, but here we're going to be looking at an across-the-board kind of command and control regulation and a cap and trade tradable permits system. We're going to do this by looking at it through an example with two electric firms who are being regulated to decrease their sulfur dioxide emissions. And so here's the setup. Both firms, Acme and US Electric, which I'll just abbreviate USE, they're coal-burning power plants which create sulfur dioxide. Both are starting out by emitting 40 tons. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Total emissions is 80 tons per month. The goal is to reduce emissions from 80 down to 60 tons per month. And each firm has a different cost. It costs Acme $100 a ton, US Electric $200 a ton, and we're off. So the first option is a regulatory situation where both firms have to cut emissions by 25%. So they're starting out with 40 each. They need to cut 10 each. So we're going to compute the cost of that pollution abatement. And let's start with Acme. So remember, we have our costs up here. $100 a ton for Acme, $200 a ton for US Electric. The cost per Acme is just $100 a ton times 10 tons of abatement for a total cost of $1,000 for them to reduce their pollution by 25%. The cost to US Electric is $200 per ton. They're also reducing by 10 tons. For a total of $2,000 to reduce their emissions. And the total cost of achieving this goal under the policy option 1 with regulation is just the $1,000 from Acme plus the $2,000 from US Electric. And it'll cost $3,000 between both firms to reduce their pollution. They're each going to have 30, and so we have 60 total tons of emissions. Okay, so we've met our policy goal, and it cost us $3,000. Okay, that's the policy option 1 across the board, command and control regulation. Now, same thing. Again, they're both starting out by polluting 40 tons each. And now we're going to look at a tradable pollution permits policy, cap and trade. So cap and trade means that we're going to cap pollution at 60 tons. And then allow tradable permits. So if you have a permit, it allows you to emit 1 ton of pollution. And so essentially we just the government, they create 60 permits, they give 30 to each firm. Now they're only allowed in total to emit 60 tons of pollution. But each firm can decide, okay, it could use all 30 of its permits, in which case they would have to both reduce emissions by 10%. That would end up giving us the same outcome as the first policy, because they would just each emit 30 tons, reduce 10 tons. That's what we just calculated. But it's also possible to emit less than 30 tons, and then you can sell your other permits Or you can purchase other permits in order to emit more than 30 tons. And that's kind of what's going to happen here. And so let's suppose that Acme is going to use 20 permits out of 30. So it's going to use 20 and abate 20. Because remember, both firms start at 40. And then because it was given 30, it sells the remaining 10 to US Electric for $150 each. US Electric pollutes the original 30 plus 10 more from the permits they bought from Acme for a total of 40. And so they're going to use 40 permits, Acme will use 20 permits, and we're going to still end up with the policy outcome or the goal of 60 units of pollution. So let's compute the cost of that. Acme first. So remember, they both start out with 40 tons of pollution. Acme is going to use 20 permits and abate 20 tons, selling 10 unused permits for revenue. So let's calculate all of those things separately. First of all, the pollution abatement. Remember, Acme, it costs them $100 per ton to reduce their pollution. And in this case, they're going to get rid of 20 tons for an abatement cost of $2,000. Then they're going to have some revenue from the sale of 10 permits, which we set up here, $150 each. So that's $150 per permit times the 10 permits that they're selling for $1,500 in revenue. And so their net cost is going to be their $2,000 cost minus the $1,500 that they made in revenue for a total cost to Acme of $500. Okay, so we're going to have to keep this number in mind. We'll come back to that. And now we do US Electric, who again started out polluting 40. They're going to use the 30 permits and buy 10 from Acme. Okay, and so the purchase of permits is just the opposite of what we did for Acme. $150 per permit times 10 permits is equal to $1,500 cost. Okay, abatement is 0 because they have 40 permits. And so their net cost is $1,500. All right, and with $1,500 for US Electric and $500 for Acme, the total cost of achieving this goal is $500 from Acme plus $1,500 from US Electric for a total cost of $2,000. And goal of 60 tons of pollution is met. 20 tons from Acme and 40 tons from US Electric. So we met our goal, and the cost was $2,000. All right, and if you recall, this is $2,000 cost, and when we calculated the across-the-board regulation, so kind of going back up here, under policy option 1, the cost was $3,000 if both firms were required to cut emissions by 25%. So the across-the-board regulation costs $3,000. The cap-and-trade market-based system costs only $2,000. And what we have there is that a tradable pollution permit system is going to reduce pollution at a lower cost in regulation because of that efficiency. Because with a cap-and-trade system, also like corrective taxes, the firms that have the lowest abatement costs will reduce pollution by more. And remember, let me scroll up again. Here we go. Acme, it costs them half to reduce their pollution compared to US Electric. So they reduced their pollution by 20. They reduced their pollution more. And then US Electric, they went ahead and continued polluting as they normally do. But in the end, the policy, the society has its optimal level of pollution and is just as well off as it was up here, which required both firms to cut emissions by 25%. So cap and trade, tradable pollution permits, reduces pollution at a lower cost than across the board regulations. And then for our result here, we have that pollution abatement is concentrated among those firms with the lowest abatement cost. All right, and again, the cost summary under the command and control regulation, that was costing $3,000. Tradable pollution permits, that was costing $2,000. Okay, so much more efficient system, and it is the market-based system. So as you have the very large government-heavy regulations, those are going to be much more efficient, much more expensive, and actually less incentive to continue reducing pollution and improve the environment than these market-based systems like cap and trade pollution permits, or also corrective taxes are another market-based system. So we actually do have a number of tradable pollution permits around the world. Here are a couple older ones where there actually have been sulfur dioxide permits traded in the United States. Europe does a number of tradable pollution permits. And in the end, some of the challenges with pollution permits are the initial allocation. So in this case, each firm both got half of the permits. So sometimes it's just randomized, sometimes it's divided equally, sometimes it's a lottery, sometimes it's an auction. And so there are alternative considerations to think about there if we want to go a couple layers deeper. But these tradable pollution permit systems are operating around the world. Okay. And yeah, so ultimately just some summary information here. We have the corrective tax, tradable pollution permits. These two end up with the same outcome, same effect as the tax. And again, just like we talked about when we discussed consumer and producer surplus, these societal costs and values coming from the willingness to pay, the value from the demand curve, and the costs coming from the supply curve, whether it's social or private costs, in order to find the optimal level of pollution in a society. If we had, okay, let's say we started out here, and this is the market outcome of 100, but let's say the socially optimal level was something that's 20% lower. In order to know what type of tax to put into place, or what type of across-the-board regulation to put into place, well, we would want the supply curve to shift up by this much. So that would be the value of the tax. And so let's suppose going from here to here is a $20 tax on whatever the market is. But that only works if we know the slope of the demand curve. If actually, let me make a copy of this. So this is what, this is what we think the market looks like. But if that's what we thought the market looked like, but the demand curve wasn't actually this, but this, and we put that corrective tax into place, well, actually, we're not going to end up with 80 units of pollution. We're going to end up with 95. And so in order to put the proper corrective tax into place, you have to know the shape and the slope of the demand curve, which is notoriously hard to estimate. So rather than trying to estimate if the demand curve looks like this or like this and what the appropriate tax would be, if we just make a pollution permit system and we say, okay, societal optimum is 80 units of pollution. Well, then we issue 80 permits of pollution permits, and then we're off. So then the market operates, people trade, the firms trade with each other. It doesn't then matter what the curve looks like, because there's only a maximum allowable pollution of 80 units. And so in that way, the pollution permit is even a maybe better market-based system, because you don't need to know the underlying values of every single individual and the cost of every single firm in society. You just put the permits and let the firms start trading. Okay, and then last thing, some people may argue that no one should be able to buy the right to pollute, or you can't put a price on the environment. But for, in practicality and in the way that the world works, if we don't put a value on something, then if you can't measure something, it's hard to conduct policy that's going to improve it. So we measure this by using dollars, and when we do so, we can put the tools and policies in place which are going to allow us to move toward that socially optimal level. Okay, and so that's the main idea there for the chapter. In our next series of videos, we're going to be looking at public